If you have your Bible, you can open it to Ephesians 4 for another installment of relationship killers. Talking about the things that we can do to destroy relationships if we're not careful. There are a lot of passages in Scripture that give us great insight into relationships. One of my favorites is Ephesians 4. We looked at the last part of Ephesians 4 last week. This week, I want to actually back up to the first part of the chapter, beginning at verse 1. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Because we belong to God, we live a different life. It's expressed here like this: a life worthy of the calling. You've been called to live up here. We can't live down here anymore. We actually have to have our lifestyle match up to the calling, this great, high, worthy, noble calling of God on our lives. Our lives have to be different. Because, he says, we belong to God. As a prisoner of the Lord, he says, I urge you to live a life worthy. There is a happy slavery for those of us who are followers of Christ. We're his prisoner. And he's captured our lives. And now we don't just do anything we want to do. We do what he wants us to do. We fulfill his mandate for our lives. And the difference shows up primarily in our relationships in a couple of different ways. But he says here, be completely humble and gentle. It shows up in the attitude that we bring to these relationships. Three things he says: humble, gentle, patient. As a follower of Christ, if we're going to live this worthy life, we can't be arrogant like we used to be, proud, self-centered. We have to be humble. We can't be mean. We can't be harsh. We can't be short with people. We got to be gentle. We can't give up on people quickly. We have to be patient. Our attitude as it relates to other people completely changes when we start to follow Christ. And then also, it shows up not just in the attitude we bring to these relationships, but the effort we bring. He says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Every effort, not just a few efforts, not just occasional effort, not just trying a few things, trying everything. Everything. Every effort. Elsewhere in the Scripture it says, as much as it lies in you, live at peace with all men. You can't always account for their side of it, but as much as it lies in you, all the things that are under your control, make every effort. And there are threats to the bonds of peace, these peaceful bonds that we're looking for. We looked at 5 of them last weekend. I wanted to review them this weekend because some of you weren't here because you were watching the Seahawks game. And I just have one question for you. How did that work out for you? We left church last weekend happy, joyful, but I'm not gonna beat you over the head with that. I just want to review what we covered last week because Willard Harley talks about love busters, 5 things that break the bank. They bankrupt the love bank, this account that we want to build with others of love. These are busters. These blow holes in the bottom. All the goodness that we're pouring into this relationship comes flowing out if one of these 5 things is in play. First, angry outbursts. You go off on the other person, they're going to shut down. They're going to withdraw. Second, disrespectful judgments. Not disagreement, mind you, disrespect. We can disagree about things, but disrespectful judgments make it about them. We point the finger. Third, annoying behavior, which is just repeatedly doing things that are known to disturb the other person. Things that annoy them, things that drive them crazy. If you just keep doing those things, that's a buster. That breaks the relationship. Fourth, selfish demands. If you give in to the temptation to make this all about you, to get yours, you don't care what other people think, you go that well, man, that just completely blows up a relationship. And then fifth, obviously, dishonesty. Because we can only know each other based on what we reveal of ourselves. And if somebody is revealing something to you that's opposite, different from reality, that destabilizes the relationship. And this is where believers, those who are followers of Christ, those who are trying to live this worthy life, this is where we get to live a different life. And actually, we do live a different life. Christians tend to have more long-lasting relationships than the general population. One of the myths that's out there is that Christians divorce, for instance, at the same rate as the general population. It's not true. For those who are practicing their faith, who are really following Jesus, they have 35% less likelihood of being involved in a divorce. And that's not a credit to us. That's a credit to him. That's a credit to his life becoming our life. God helps us to love well. And then researchers come along and help us to see what loving a person well really looks like. And one of the most significant relationship experts of our generation did his work about an hour away from us at the University of Washington, John Gottman. John Gottman, I'm going to play a video of him here in a moment, but over 30 years of research, and Gottman has been able to differentiate what he calls relational masters from relational disasters. An astounding amount of research in which he has been able to, and this is amazing, predict with over 90% accuracy based on a 3 to 5 minute conversation that he can watch between a couple, a conflicted conversation. He can look in on that conversation and with over 90% accuracy predict whether that will end in divorce based on the body language of the people, the words they use, and what he calls the 4 horsemen. Now, in the Bible, there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's conquest, war, hunger, and death. When those 4 start to happen, we know we're at the end of this thing. And he uses this analogy about relationships. When I see these 4 things happening in a conversation, in a relationship, it is the beginning of the end. So I want him to talk about it. And we're going to watch this little video. I hope you'll find it interesting and helpful as he talks about these 4 things that can really determine the demise of a marriage.
And that was true. We were really getting paid to watch couples deteriorate and making a living at it. And so we really did a series of research studies trying to look at the masters of relationships, the ones, who really stayed together, didn't get divorced, and were pretty happy, more or less. And the disasters of relationships, the ones that broke apart, and the ones that stayed together and were unhappy as well. And we really were able to study couples across the whole life course. In fact, we're just completing a study in the Bay Area now that we started 20 years ago with 2 groups of couples, a group of couples in their 40s and a group of couples in their 60s. And our oldest subjects are now in their late 80s. So we're just finishing this. And across the whole life course, we've looked at transitions to becoming parents, what happens when a baby arrives in the relationship, how does it affect the relationship, how do relationships affect babies, can we predict anything about child development, and we found to our great surprise that we could predict, as we followed couples over many, many years, with over 90% accuracy, what would happen to a marriage. Even from the first 3 minutes of a conflict discussion a couple is having, we can predict 96% of the time how the entire conversation will go. And from the conversation, we can predict with high accuracy whether a couple get divorced or not, how happy they'll be. And in fact, one of my graduate students, Allison Shapiro, who studied couples in the last trimester of pregnancy, was able to predict the child's temperament and the child's neurological development and reduce 50% of the uncertainty in looking at the first 3 years of the baby's life, just by looking at how the parents argued in the last trimester. So I want to take you through knowing our 35 years of research in which our first question was, could we find any patterns that discriminated the masters from the disasters of relationships? And second, what theory could we develop to understand those patterns? And only when we developed that theory were we able to design interventions to help people. And so these are all scientifically based interventions. What discriminated the disasters from the masters of relationships was that the masters were really very gentle with one another. even when they raised an issue. They raised it as if it was kind of an invisible soccer ball that they were kicking around together. They took responsibility for even a small part of the problem. Whereas the disasters really pointed their finger at their partner and were critical, and their attitude was that they were kind of diagnosing their partner's personality defects. And they wanted to be really appreciated for that by their partner. And they were hoping that their partner would respond by saying, "Thank you for pointing out all the ways in which I am failing as a human being. Can we have lunch next Tuesday so we can talk about this some more? You are such a wise person, John. Thank you so much." Unfortunately, criticism, which is stating the problem in the relationship as a defect in the partner, leads to the second predictor we have of what predicts relationships' demise, which is defensiveness. And defensiveness is any way of warding off a perceived attack. But unfortunately, the masters do the opposite. They say, "Interesting. That's an interesting point. Tell me more about what you see as our problem and how I contribute to this." The disasters become defensive and say, "It's not my fault, it's your fault." And they raise something that's a counterattack rather than responding by saying, "Interesting point, tell me more." Or they whine. They present themselves as an innocent victim. So we saw a pattern in the way conflicts begin. And our best predictor of relationship demise was a behavior we call contempt, which is any statement you make to your partner from a superior place. And if you think you're more punctual than your partner, more intelligent, more knowledgeable about something, or a better parent, or cleaner, or tidier, then usually what you say is really speaking down and has an air of superiority. The most common way we found was direct insults and name calling, calling people a jerk and an idiot, saying what they're saying is ridiculous. But one of my favorite ones is correcting somebody's grammar when they're angry with you. I think that's a really effective way of being contemptuous. So if my wife says, "I could care less about that," I would say, "Hold on there, honey. It is not I could care less. It is I couldn't care less." That's the right way to say it. Now, what was your point? So it's one of my favorite ways. So contempt is our best predictor of divorce and breakup in same-sex relationships as well, and also a predictor of how many infectious illnesses in the next 4 years the recipient of contempt will get. So it's been shown that contempt is a very wide spectrum downregulator of immune functioning. The final predictor that discriminates the masters from the disasters during conflict we call stonewalling, which is basically listener withdrawal from the conflict. And the stonewaller basically doesn't give the usual cues that a listener gives, like head nodding, eye contact, brief vocalizations, yeah, and facial movement. Yeah, that could be, yeah, sure. Oh, interesting, yeah. The stonewaller is really tuned out, like a stone wall. But when we try to predict stonewalling from our data, from our stream of interaction, we found that an elevated heart rate above the intrinsic rhythm of the heart, around 100 beats a minute, predicts stonewalling. So we interviewed stonewallers about these moments in their interaction, and it turned out what they were trying to do was really calm down and not make the interaction worse. So the internal monologue of a stonewaller was something like this. "Okay, just don't say anything. Let her burn herself out. How long can this last? 10 minutes to the game. She can't touch me then." That was the hope, anyway, of the stonewaller. And now, did guys who are in master relationships stonewall? They did, but they were able to self-soothe physiologically. Now, so we had these basic findings that discriminated the masters from the disasters, but they didn't help us in understanding it. By putting together the data that we had, looking at couples over long periods of time, we discovered that one of the most important discriminators between the masters and disasters of relationships was the ability to repair interaction. that in fact, in all relationships, regrettable incidents and arguments that go out of control and hurting your partner's feelings are inevitable. And one of the contributions Bob and I wound up making was that we wound up studying really good relationships. And before this research, therapists really had to fantasize about what a good relationship would be like. Oprah Winfrey hasn't had one, for example. And, you know, Dr. Phil just got divorced. So, you know, we don't know, these guys don't really know what a good relationship is like from their own experience. And we were able to do that by doing research on good relationships. And every relationship experiences conflict and periods of alienation. But the difference between the masters and the disasters is they're able to repair. And so repair turns out to be really the sine qua non of relationships. Being able to say, I'm really sorry. You know, I blew it that time. You know, that didn't go very well. Can we talk about it? And what we thought was that maybe the way the repair was made would make an enormous difference. And for several years, we looked at the nature of repair, and we discovered that we were looking in the wrong place. It was really the recipient of repair that was the important person to look at. And what made the difference in repair working and being effective was the quality of the friendship in the relationship. Not looking at conflict, but looking at how people maintain friendship and intimacy and emotional connection. It's about the way people create a sense of shared meaning and purpose. Because when people start to have a committed relationship, they are really not just having a relationship with one another that's romantic, that has conflict, but they're really building a life together, a life with meaning and purpose and mission and legacy and culture and values. And unless they have the conversations they need to have that make those meanings intentional and shared, then they go through life really not building this very important existential part of their connection together. And that's pretty much everything I know about relationships. So I'll stop there. Thank you for listening.
So I hope you found that interesting. You know, the scripture says that we're called to live a life that's worthy, that's about being completely humble, completely gentle, patient, bearing with one another in love. And what Dr. Gottman has uncovered is the opposite of that. And as he was talking about those four, which I want to just review so that you can write them down in your notes, the four being criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. As he reviewed those, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, I've done that. Okay, I've done that. Ooh, I've done that too. I mean, all of these, I think any of us who've been involved in marriage, either in the past or in the present, we can relate to this. We can say, yeah, I get it. And I would even say a lot of that seems natural. It seems natural to me. And I think what we're after really is not natural. What we're after is supernatural. And what he said is that there aren't people out there who really have these experiences and can tell us about it. Even the experts really don't have these successful relationships themselves. And this is where I think all the answers are above us. I think when Jesus came, I'm thinking about the Sermon on the Mount, where he gathered all the people around him, and he began to teach them, and in the middle of that, he taught them a prayer. He said, this is how you should pray. This is Matthew chapter 6. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. I believe in the Lord's Prayer, there's a pattern here, what I would call the Lord's Prayer of repair. Dr. Gottman mentioned how we need to repair as we go along. And I think there's some reparative statements here in the Lord's Prayer, or a pattern that we can follow. I think every one of us who are in relationship or will be can follow this prayer as a little bit of a guide. First of all, to put God first. This is where the Lord's Prayer begins. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Maybe this marriage is not my marriage, and it's not your marriage. Maybe this is God's marriage. In fact, Jesus said, what God has joined together, let not man separate. When this marriage happened, it was his marriage. And so we start with him. We put him first. Second, we ask for his will. He goes on to say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's not my will for this marriage. It's not your will for this marriage. It's his will for this marriage. Third, we ask for provision. Give us today our daily bread. Marriage, any relationship that's close, it's a daily adventure. And we need that grace. We need that supernatural love every day. And he says, give us today what we need. Fourth, we ask for forgiveness. Forgive us our debts. Confessing our failings first. There's a sequence here. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who have debts against us. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. The sequence is very important. First, you have to own your own stuff. In fact, I think you need to over-own your own stuff. Because when you think you're owning it, you're not. You're hedging it a little bit. You're giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. Over-own your own stuff. As you were watching the video, if you were thinking, man, I hope my wife is listening to this. Or you're thinking, man, I hope my husband's getting this. We're off on the wrong foot. I mean, that video was for you. That video was for me. We have to start in the right place. What goes around comes around. If I start off in a conversation with my wife, honey, first of all, I got to say I'm sorry for my part in this, for what I'm bringing to this. You know what I usually get from her? The same. You know, I'm sorry too. If I start off by pointing the finger at her going, you know what, you are screwing this up. You know what, I'm going to get back? More of that. No, you're screwing this up. And now we get this non-virtuous cycle going, and the Lord's Prayer busts this all up by saying, Lord, first of all, forgive me my sins. Forgive me my shortcomings. Now, fifth, we forgive them for theirs. Forgive quickly. Be a quick forgiver of your partner's stuff. Be quick to own your own. Be quick to forgive theirs. And then number 6, to ask for deliverance. It says, deliver us from the evil one. You know, there's someone out there who loves to kill and destroy marriages. And you have to tip your hat to the enemy. He's doing an awesome job. He's incredibly effective right now in what he is doing in destroying marriages. I mean, you just got to hand it to him. He is killing us. He is destroying us, just like he said he would. When they study women who are coming out of divorce and they just let them talk, and these are women who don't know each other, okay, and they just start writing down the things that they're saying about the marriage, about their husband. It is remarkable how those 20 separate women are saying the exact same thing. Why? Because they're getting a script. They're all getting a script from the enemy. The enemy is deceiving them. The enemy is destroying them and destroying the marriage. So we pray, deliver us, save us, protect this marriage. So I have kind of rewritten this Lord's Prayer as really a prayer for marriage that goes like this. Our Father in heaven, we want to honor you with this marriage. May your will be done in this marriage as it is done in heaven. Give us what we need each day for this marriage. Forgive me for my shortcomings as I forgive my spouse for their shortcomings. And keep the evil one from destroying what you want to build between us. John Gottman also has a repair checklist. He takes each of these 4 horsemen and he offers a counter to it. First of all, with criticism, he says we need to learn to complain without blame. Like, let's say my spouse doesn't come home on time. The way I could raise that with them is something like this. You know, honey, I thought we were going to communicate with each other if we were going to be running late. When I don't get communication from you, I start to get anxious. I start to feel nervous. I start to feel fearful. You know, I thought we had talked about how we were going to communicate about this. That's complaining without blaming. Blaming would be, why are you always late? Why don't you ever call? That has a finger point on it. That has a sharp edge on the end of it. But as he described it, he said, you know, these relational masters were gentle with the relationship. It's almost like they were holding something in between each other that was of common value. That was a threat to the two of them. It's a threat to the relationship. We don't let it become a point of adversarial relationship between us. We together have to come to a solution. That's what he means, complain. It's a complaint. It's not a criticism. Second, he says for defensiveness, we have to take responsibility. And here I think the Lord's Prayer is so beautiful. Forgive us our debts as we forgive their debts. Third, he says for contempt, we have to build a culture of appreciation. Right at the end there of his talk, he said this is what it's really about. It's about building a shared experience, a culture for the two of us. And he says part of what has to be an important element of that culture is appreciation. This is the counterbalance to contempt, where we, in our culture between each other, we're always praising each other, thanking each other, being appreciative for what each other are bringing, the good stuff that's there. We build a culture around that. And then fourth, stonewalling, he says we have to do physiological self-soothing. He talked about the heart rate going up, which you've probably had this experience. Somebody criticizes you. You get called into the boss's office, and in the moment, you're being flooded. I mean, your emotions are just getting overrun. You're having a physiological response. Now, on the drive home, you'll think of 15 things that you could have said, but in the moment, you can't think of one. You're just frozen. And what we have to do there, and relational masters learn to do this, is not get caught up in that. Not allow our body or even our emotional, physical, physiological response to dictate how we're going to behave in the moment. We're going to counteract that. We're going to push back. And there's various self-soothing techniques. Journaling is a great self-soothing technique. Meditation, exercise. Sometimes you just got to go and you got to burn off some steam so you can think straight again. But one that I like is, and this is just a relaxation method that I call in for 7, out for 11. I breathe in on a 7 count. I breathe out on an 11 count. Why? Because it's been physically shown to redistribute the blood in your body. When you're in a fight or flight situation, all the blood wants to go to the major muscle groups, your thighs, your biceps, which are obviously a major muscle group for me, my biceps. So, I just, so much blood rushing there. And where's the blood coming from? Your brain. Your brain is losing the blood. Your biceps are gaining the blood. Unfortunately, in these moments of panic like that, you don't need the blood in your biceps. You need it in your brain. And so breathing in for 7, breathing out for 11. I actually do this quite often. I'm in situations that get anxious, and I start getting anxious with it. And I go, no, Dave. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. What am I doing? I'm physiologically self-soothing. I'm taking responsibility even for how my body is reacting in this moment. I don't want that to lead. I want Christ to lead. I want to be gentle. I want to be humble. I want to be patient. I want to make every effort. And I can't do that if my brain is fried, if I can't think straight. And so we have to take these kind of actions and responsibilities to save our relationships. Now, you know that I am a big fan of G.K. Chesterton. We had at one time our meeting space in downtown Burlington on Fairhaven. We took the old Grand Theater and renovated that, and there's a small, cozy little confines. We had a little coffee shop in there called G.K. Chesterton's Coffee Shop. Unfortunately, nobody ever came to buy coffee there, so we didn't have that for very long. But I'm such a fan of Chesterton. He wrote over 100 books. One of the books that he wrote was what C.S. Lewis read, which caused him to become a follower of Christ. And he also wrote a little pamphlet called The Superstition of Divorce. He didn't want it to be a book. He wanted it to be a pamphlet. In fact, early in the pamphlet, he says, it's the object of a pamphlet to be out of date as soon as possible. It can only survive when it does not succeed. This was in 1920 that he wrote this, and he could see divorce starting to happen. And he said, I'm going to write this little pamphlet called The Superstition of Divorce. If this works, no one's going to need it. If this ends up being printed, it's because it didn't work. The problem persisted. Well, here we are, almost 100 years later. The problem has persisted. His main point, which was the title, is that divorce is more of a superstition than marriage ever was. And he uses the word superstition a little bit differently here than we might use it today, but it's the idea that people have these fanciful ideas about marriage. If I get married, when I get married, man, that's going to be great. And we get fantasy land going about marriage. He says divorce is way more superstitious than that. That people think, man, if I was divorced, if I could just get away from this person, all my problems would be solved. And what Chesterton does in this little pamphlet is to ask us to examine our whole concept of loyalty. And what he does is he uses loyalty to your country as a metaphor. And he says most men are going to admit the necessity of being loyal to their country. He says the patriot may revile his country, but he won't renounce it. Like many of us in this room right now, we're not happy with our country, but we would fight for it. We would fight for it. That's how loyal we are to our country. Now, he says there's other things that we're not that loyal to. He says, like the places we shop, we might shop here for a while and then shop there for a while. He says we can go from shop to shop. We don't go from country to country. We have loyalty to our nation. And then he asks, shouldn't we have an even greater loyalty to our family? Why would we have less loyalty to our family than we do to our country? In fact, he even says if we expect a man to be loyal to the commonwealth that made him, why shouldn't he be loyal to the commonwealth he has made? His family. He's saying family is way more fundamental than country. If you're going to die for your country, why won't you die for your family? If you're going to die for this nation, why won't you die for your marriage? Why give up? Why quit? Why act like it's like going from shop to shop? He says it's not. He says the vow made most freely must be the vow kept most firmly. Some people think, well, I made the decision to marry this person. I can make the decision to unmarry this person. Easy come, easy go. And he says, no, you're right. You had all the choice in the world. You could make any choice you wanted. But when you made this choice, it's got to be a firm one. It is a free choice. It has to be a firm choice. I think this is what Ephesians 4 was saying when it says there's a higher calling here. We have to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Let's bow for prayer.